Good evening, I'm Scott Schaefer from KQED's California Report magazine. Welcome to This Week in Northern California. Well, we begin with some news of the week, and joining me are Josh Richmond, Bay Area News Group politics reporter, Cy Musiker, KQED news reporter and host of The Do List, and Andrea Koski, San Francisco Examiner staff writer. Well, today, an important deadline for City College of San Francisco to submit its plan to keep accreditation. Last year, the Accrediting Commission gave the embattled community college 14 controversial reforms to complete. Students, teachers, and members of the public held a rally Thursday in support of keeping education affordable and accessible. And Andrea Koski, give us a sense of what's in this much anticipated report, and does it go at least part of the way toward satisfying their demands? Well,
yeah, it's about 290 pages that the administration turned in today. So it was this afternoon.
You haven't read it yet, I assume.
I've read parts of it. So it details those 14 recommendations. They were given them back in July. And so they've had 8 months essentially to turn this college around. And so the report goes pretty in depth and details what they've done, cuts they've made, changes that they've tried to accomplish in those very short 8 months. And that's what they're hoping the accreditation team does see, that they have at least made a really good effort.
And give us a sense, how did we get here? How did they get into this mess?
That's often a point of conversation in the last 8 months. So when the accrediting team came last spring, they looked at what had happened 6 years ago, because they come every 6 years. They have to take a look at how the college is working. And 6 years ago, they gave the college a couple of points to address and to change and to look at. And essentially, they didn't change them. They didn't look at them. They just continued operating. And so when they came back last spring, they noticed that none of them were done and things had gotten worse.
So if they had these recommendations they were supposed to follow 6 years ago and they never did it, have any heads been identified that can roll because of this? Or?
Not that I know of, or at least they haven't looked at that yet. They're looking more now to become one and to move forward and to address what has been given to them essentially, and to become a cohesive college and continue to serve all the students that they need to continue to serve.
Well, speaking of students, who gets hurt if a place like City College of San Francisco closes up?
The students themselves. They would have to, the college would have to figure out how to, they'd have to contact all the other Bay Area community colleges and figure out how to transfer them to make sure that these students can continue their education and can continue to learn.
And obviously students are unhappy, faculty's unhappy. So what are some of these recommendations that they're making, and why does the college resist sort of implementing them?
Well, they're not now. They did a little previously, but now they have embraced them. The college administration and the leaders have, and a lot of students and faculty have. But
they feel like they've done enough, and I mean, is there going to be more pain still to come? Is that what the protests were about?
The protests are about that. The protests, there is a huge faction of the community college of students and faculty that don't want to see these changes. They like City College the way that they is. They like that it serves so many people in so many aspects, but they don't like. They don't like the changes that are happening because of these recommendations. And these recommendations are looking at governance, they're looking at the way finances are being handled, and they're looking at structure. And those have to change in order to move forward, I think.
And so what happens now? What's the timeline?
So next, now that the report is in, the Accreditation Commission will come back in April, I believe it is, and then take a look just to see that they actually made these changes.
Now, there is an elected, Josh asked about accountability, there is an elected board of trustees. Are they responsible to some extent? I mean, who can people who are concerned about this turn to say, hey, you need to really pay attention to what they're saying and get your house in order?
Well, I think that's still up in the air about whose fault this really is about, whether or not it was previous administrators, because we do have an interim administration at the moment, and a lot of the Board of Trustees were actually around, and whether or not they knew and whether or not they made decisions is still kind of unknown. But the Board of Trustees, a lot of them, they're all behind it. They're all, I mean, even Chris Jackson was out yesterday trying to support students. And a lot of the other Board of Trustees, they all want to save the college. So they've publicly all stated how much they support, and they're going to do what they can to keep it open, whether it is these changes and kind of confiding with the accreditation report, as well as trying to find a happy medium for students and to continue to serve everybody.
And there have been some give backs by faculty and other staff. How is it going over with organized labor?
My understanding of organized labor is that's kind of a holdup right now. The administration obviously wants them to have more cuts, and the faculty and staff have taken a lot of cuts. They were back I believe it was last July, they were given about a 3% cut, and then recently they took another 8.8% cut over the year, and they're still in negotiations, and I think the administration wants them to take more cuts because they do take up a huge chunk of the City College's budget. They take up about, I think it was 92% is what they're saying, which is a lot more than every other community college in California.
There's also a lot of campuses. I mean, is that unusual for a school this size to have so many? And are they thinking of closing more of them? Some of them.
Well, they've already closed 3, and so they're looking at more, possibly more. I think more are on the table. They do have 9 campuses, and they have dozens of sites and instructional places, and even just taking like a classroom at a church. So they are looking at it and evaluating those as well to see if that's another cost saver, if they can continue that. But at the same time, faculty and even students are saying that they want to be sure that they're continuing to serve folks. So if they close something way out in the sunset and then they have to travel all the way into maybe the Castro, that might be, somebody might not take a course.
Yeah.
So that's what they're weighing.
All right, Andrea, thanks very much for that. Well, now we move on to money problems of a different kind, and classical music lovers are taking note. San Francisco Symphony musicians went on strike this week, canceling 2 concerts so far and putting in jeopardy a high-profile tour of the East Coast that is set to start next week. Cy Musiker, give us a sense. What's the core problem here? What's the disagreement over?
Right, the disagreement appears to be over money, and the musicians say that's the case themselves. Right now, the symphony management are offering a flat wage for this next year, with a very small increase in a couple of years out for the 2 succeeding years, and some givebacks on health benefits and on pensions. And the musicians say what they want is parity with the very 2 best paid orchestras in the country, Chicago and Los Angeles. And it's a good comparison because really San Francisco is one of the very top orchestras in the world, along with Chicago and LA. But it's also a dangerous comparison, I would say. Chicago has had its own financial problems. Its endowment is not in great shape. There was a strike last fall there, and there could be cutbacks in the future there. Symphony management says, look, we've just gone through a recession. You guys got a 17% pay hike over a 4-year contract. Now we need to check ourselves to make sure we can keep our budget balanced every year.
And the average salary for the musician, something like $165,000 a year, 10 weeks paid vacation. Most people would say that's not bad.
This is a touchy issue, I think. If you look at the news stories that have been in print or the comments online and on the air on Forum this morning when the Symphony, or KQED's Forum, when the Symphony strike was the issue, I think a lot of people aren't very sympathetic. And they run a risk here, I think the same risk that professional athletes run when they get into a pissing match with management, with team owners, because I think it can turn off fans who look at what the salaries and benefits are and think this is a pretty cushy thing. On the other hand, these are the very best symphony musicians in the world. They're like the Buster Posies of the San Francisco Giants, a comparison, in fact, that the musicians themselves made when their kettle drummer, the guy who plays the big timpani in the back of the orchestra, is going to Chicago, he says, for better money and better relationship with the management.
Yeah, if they're having any public sympathy problems, I think wearing Dodger caps earlier this week is probably not the way to build a lot of support.
Especially during spring training.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that was to bring home their point that this is just like Buster Posey going to the Dodgers. That was the comparison they made. Right. Perhaps the picture wasn't the right one that they wanted to present. The optics were not the right ones. And so I think
they're not about optics. They're about sound.
And here's when you look back, there was a pretty good negotiation back in 2006. The last couple of negotiations have gone very well, but back in '96, '97, there was a very sour period for management and the orchestra musicians, and they really reformed the way they get along. They brought in mediators from Harvard and some local people, and they changed the way management and the musicians looked at their common goals. And the fear is that has broken down. What this musician who's moving to Chicago, David Herbert, said was that right now there's a hostile atmosphere here in San Francisco. And this is with a new executive director, Brent Osink, who's come in. And I mean, one of the things I think musicians have, for good reason, are a little bitter about the fact that they found out that Brent Osink, the executive director, got a 6-figure retention bonus in 2 different years during the recession, the same time when the orchestra says, gee, we were kind of hurting a little bit. And they did have a deficit last year. It's not that bad for these big nonprofit institutions, $844,000 on an $80 million budget.
So next week there's a big tour that they're supposed to leave for, obviously a strategic time to go out on strike.
A brilliant time to go out on strike, and it creates some real brinkmanship. The orchestra has canceled each concert very carefully at the very last minute. There's a concert Saturday and Sunday. They have yet to cancel those. And then they're supposed to leave on Tuesday. They really would like to see some results by then. The good news is they're negotiating right now, and I just looked at my phone. I got a text a few minutes ago from the PR staff at the Symphony. They've been negotiating for 6 hours today. They were at it for 13 hours yesterday. Maybe that's a good sign.
And you know, healthcare is on the table, right?
That's right.
Is there some reason that musicians? I mean, why would healthcare? I mean, healthcare costs are going up for everyone, but are musicians in some ways more vulnerable to health problems?
Well, I do think it's it's a pretty good deal they have. I mean, people with kids and wives who are on the plan have to pay a little bit, but single musicians make no contribution to their health care. So I think they're being asked for some extra money. But they do have physical problems. They have repetitive stress problems. Violinists do this thing with their neck, you know, and they get the violin up in there, and if they can't perform physically, they can't play and they can't earn a living. And so it can be very dangerous for musicians who don't get good health care.
And we've got a couple of other big arts organizations in town, at least the ballet and the opera. Are there, you know, is their package of benefits comparable? Would you say?
They don't make quite as much money. The ballet musicians especially, but I should say their contracts are coming up later this year. And as a side note, the opera just announced they ran $1.5 million budget in this past audited 2011-2012.
All right. Yeah. Well, California courts have been facing the music as well for the past 5 years. California's court system hit hard by more than $1 billion in budget cuts. This week, Chief Justice Tani Cantil-Sakauye asked the state legislature to restore funding or pay a price.
Good afternoon. I believe that if we do not reinvest in justice, you will see or will continue to see services to the public from the courts are cut or will be eliminated or deeply restricted.
Josh Richmond, give us a sense, what impact are these cuts having on justice, out in the field in California?
Well, you might say that the symphony of justice is being silenced all over the state. Or you might not. We're talking about wholesale closures of courthouses, of courtrooms, of 2,600 fewer judicial staffers, either through layoff or attrition. You're talking about 30 of the different county courts reducing their hours of operation in various places. When one place closes, it means you have to drive somewhere else to get your court business done, which in the Bay Area might not be that much of a big deal, but in a huge county or more rural or suburban county can be a very big deal for people. And I think what the Chief Justice was trying to say is that as these people who use the court system are impacted either by reduced services or increased fees, which has been a big part of it as well. These are people who are probably the least able in our society to deal with these added burdens of trying to use our justice system.
So she knows her audience. She's making that case to the Democrats in the legislature.
She's making that case to the Democrats in the legislature, and they are somewhat responsive. You know, the chairman of the Assembly Judiciary Committee immediately put out a statement after her speech saying, that this is a case of justice being denied, and they have to find a way to increase the funding. But as Governor Jerry Brown said, as he put his budget proposal forth in January, we're better. We're getting better, but we still don't have enough money to restore all that has been taken from us in the last couple of years. And unfortunately, his attitude so far has been that the courts are going to have to take a number and stand in line with everybody else to have to be made whole from the cuts that they've experienced.
Does this mean, now this is affecting civil courts as well as criminal courts, does this mean, how long if I filed a suit, how long might I have to wait to get a court hearing?
I mean, that may vary by county and by the resources in each particular county. I can say that criminal cases have to be given precedence in order to meet constitutional requirements for speedy and fair trials. And so very often it is the civil cases that will get shunted aside and pushed further down the calendar, and
things like court interpreters, those sort of things that may affect low-income people more than others.
Absolutely, and I mean you could see it right here in San Francisco, which has been a very hard hit. The superior courts here in San Francisco have been very hard hit. There was a one-day strike by workers there last July. You might recall. These are people who man the counters, who keep the files and so on and so forth. And they took a 5% pay cut that was imposed at the start of the new fiscal year, and they weren't happy about it. But the management says we just simply do not have the money. We don't have the money coming from the state to be able to cover this stuff. So.
I remember that a few years back, her predecessor, Ron George, tried to implement a computer system that would link all 58 counties, and the cost was something like, I don't know, several $100 million. That ballooned, I think, to $2 billion.
Yeah.
They've canceled that now.
Right.
So are there cases like that of mismanagement and money being wasted that makes their case maybe a little bit less sympathetic?
That didn't necessarily come out of the same pot as trial court operations, but yes, that was a huge big deal. The centralized computer system that never was and it may never be at this point.
After spending $500 million on it.
And now we're seeing construction projects all over. The court construction projects get frozen everywhere because the money that the governor's budget has running the trial operations is essentially $200 million that's going to have to be pulled out of construction funds for this year. So it's sort of been a downward spiral. It's $1.2 billion, $1.2 billion over the past 3 years, and any system would be hard pressed to absorb that kind of thing. And there's not really much relief in sight, and I think that's what they're most concerned about. Even if they do pull that $200 out of capital costs this year, what happens the year after that, and the year after that, and the year after that?
And do we have to wait for the May revise to see what the governor really is going to do with the courts?
And this speech that the Chief Justice gave this week is clearly only the most public instance of a lobbying campaign that started the day the governor introduced his budget and will end the day that the governor signs a budget. And they'll be fighting behind the scenes every single day to convince lawmakers on both sides of the aisle that this has to change.
And then just quickly, if the governor adds back money, what would be like a top priority, do you think? Any sense of that?
Oh, I think getting their courtrooms back open, very simply expanding access and restoring the canceled courtroom hours that they've had to cut over the last couple of years.
Maybe reducing some of the wait times that people are experiencing getting into court.
Yeah, it's all about access.
Yeah. All right, Josh Richmond, thanks very much.